Everyone, if this is your first lesson back from our 2-week hiatus, welcome. Welcome to quarter 4, so we all have a fresh start at this point. We're going to jump into some new content. We were kind of wrapping things up when we hit that little break, so I thought instead of putting the final touches on it, we'd kind of just leave that stuff behind and move into our quarter 4 work. We are going to work with Shakespeare. Some of you may have heard the name before or have some familiarity with it. For some of you, it may feel brand new. We'll spend a lot of time this week getting familiar. We'll talk a little bit more about what we want to do with it. But the place we're going to start is with insults. So I just want to put this list up on the board and let you first choose your own favorite word. So take a look through this list. These are all words that Shakespeare may have worked with. And just pick one that stands out for you. So our goal today is just going to be to familiarize ourselves with Shakespearean language. I'll get more into who Shakespeare was, what did he do. Shakespeare was a writer, that's why we're looking at Shakespeare in our English course. He wrote way back a long time ago, which is why we're going to spend some time getting familiar with his language before going in and interacting with some more of his work. So there is a video in today's assignment that will be really helpful for the work we're going to do today. So if you are watching this video first, pause it, go watch that video. It's about 5 or 6 minutes. When you're done, come back. All right, I'm hoping that you've paused me and now you are back to watch the rest of this. So you learned a little bit about Shakespearean insults. I just want to talk about Shakespeare's writing. So Shakespeare wrote plays. His plays were enacted in a theater, some of them indoor, some of them outdoor. I want to just compare them a little bit to movies today when we're thinking about Shakespeare's use of insults and his use of words. So his plays took place in the 15 and 1600s. Our movies took place in the late 1900s for you guys, just in the 2000s. They really only had the people who were acting and then some minor props and costumes. For us today, we have the people who are acting and then really extensive props and costumes. We also have special effects. We also have green screens. If you're not too familiar with the movie business, all those big explosions and people like flying in outer space, they're not always doing those exact things. Which led to stuff in Shakespeare's time not having all that. They had to connect and engage their audience differently, and they did it with their words. They needed to make sure that they were engaging the audience, and one way Shakespeare did it was through kind of trying to joke around as much as he could, and a lot of that came through with insults. And if you just think about it visually, take a look at our scene from Avengers on the right, big explosion in the background. They all have their fancy costumes on. The hammer is floating into Thor's hand. Not really stuff you could pull off in the 1500s. If you take a look at the Shakespearean theater, you could really have someone standing on a bench and looking up at a window. So not as much you could do with all the background stuff. It was really the people and their words that would draw audiences into what they were doing. So Shakespeare is famous for his insults. I pulled a couple from his plays, so we'll just listen to them to hear what a Shakespeare insult sounds like. You guys can see some of the visuals that go along with them. Thou lily-livered boy, and that's from Macbeth. I do desire we may be better strangers as you like it. And some of these you kind of like need to read it, let it sit in, see what it means, read it a second time. Some of them are pretty good insults. Out of my sight thou dost infect my eyes, from Richard III. On the bottom left, a pox of your throat, you bawling, blasphemous, incharitable dog, from The Tempest. She is spherical, like a globe. I could find out countries in her, which is from A Comedy of Errors. And you have such a February face, so full of frost, of storm, and cloudiness. And that's from Much Ado About Nothing. So Shakespeare has hundreds of these. Insults were kind of his thing. He threw them into his plays. And they all had a purpose, and this was covered in that other video, that sometimes they are setting the mood of a scene. It's a playful scene. It's a scene where people are going to be aggressive. It could create an atmosphere for the setting to help you feel like what's going on in the background there. And a lot of times it'll be building relationships between characters or letting you know something about an individual character. So it serves a purpose as well as sometimes being funny, sometimes engaging the audience. Just really helps us to figure out those things that we're not using things like background and explosions to figure out. So what we're going to do, this will be our first foray into Shakespeare's languages. We're going to play around with some of his words and create some Shakespeare insults. So also on our course page, there is a document that is a Shakespearean insult kit. It's just a list of different Shakespearean words that you can use for this. And they're kind of separated into 3 columns based on different parts of speech. So if you're able to take one from each column, it'll form a sentence. Some of those sentences may not feel natural to you, again, because we're not super familiar with his words. But when you hear them together, they kind of, you're like, oh, that kind of ties together and makes sense. So we'll be putting together in that way to make an insult. So you take one word from column 1, one from column 2, one from column 3, put them all together, you have your insult. So here's an example of what that looks like. It's those words we started with at the beginning. I told you to see one that maybe stood out to you. So I'm going to take one from each column. I highlighted in red the one I'm going to use. I'm going to use bawdy, beef-witted, and footlicker. The other thing that it says in there is that you're going to put the word thou before it. So I'm going to take my 3 words and put them into a sentence, and then I will be insulting all of you. Thou art a bawdy, beef-witted footlicker. So that is my insult. We're going to play around with those, and in today's assignment, it's actually broken up into 2. There's a couple questions, and then there's a discussion thread. I tried to make both of them kind of short assignments, so it's technically 2 clicks or 2 assignments, but they're both kind of like half assignments so that you can do both as part of today's work. And it's really going to be going in, making sure that you can play around with those insults, and then you guys are going to use those insults on each other. And then hopefully by the end of it, you'll feel a little more familiar with Shakespearean language as we get going with more Shakespeare stuff.